And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Ron Tite. Ron is an interesting guy. He is the founder of Church and State, which was originally the Tite Group. That's a Toronto based content marketing agency. And he is an author. He wrote a book called Everyone's an Artist, or at least they should be, which was published in 2016 by HarperCollins. And he's an award-winning advertising writer and creative director for some huge brands that you'd know: Air France, Avion, Fidelity, etc. So, Ron's a really interesting example of a business guy that has used content and thought leadership and books and all that to, among other things, drive his business and grow his business. So that's probably what we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about today. So welcome aboard, Ron. How are you?
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me. And hello, everybody listening at home.
There we go. So, it's interesting when we start to think about how people and why people do what they do in terms of thought leadership. So I would probably suggest that you wouldn't go out there at a cocktail party and say, "Hey, my name is Ron. I'm an author." You'd probably say, "Hey, I'm Ron, the CEO of a marketing agency." Is that right?
I'll even just be more coy and just say, I own a marketing agency or something like that, or I started a marketing agency, and then and I kind of speak and write. I'll just kind of downplay it a little bit.
Right, right. But the speaking and writing is actually a good driver of business for your way that you've strategically differentiated your firm. So talk about sort of how you started, because it typically doesn't start with a book because that's a heavy lift. Like, how did you start to experiment with content and thought leadership and realize, like, wow, there's some cool business outcomes here?
Well, I was a stand-up for 20 years and started to do corporate comedy, and then because I was, also working in advertising for big global brands, I started to bring in and integrate some strategic perspectives into the comedy, and that was weird because people were like, uh, "You should know
Yeah.
that stuff if you're a comedian." And so I flipped it and said, "Look, I'm not, because I realized there's no market for a comedian who knows about business, but there's a massive market for a funny business guy." And so I walked away from comedy completely and removed it from my bio and everything, and then focused on speaking. And so that was where it first started, because I wanted to pursue that I just got more satisfaction out of the moments of silence in a room. And so the development of the thought leadership was the thing that contributed to the moments of satisfaction on stage.
So, but you also knew that you had sort of the stage bug, right? Because I have lots of clients that wind up on the stage for lots of reasons. Some of them technical expertise and they don't really have the presence, but you have the stage bug, right? So that's an interesting bug to have. And then you realized, like, hey, I'd like to eat, so this would pay. If I could be the funny business guy versus the starving comic, that might be a better approach.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I don't even say it's a bug, like because I was a very experienced stand up at that point.
Sure.
So I knew the method to the madness, right? And I knew that if I applied that method in a thought leadership perspective, then that would, I don't know, I just thought yes, it could be more rewarding financially, but that I just got way more satisfaction out of it.
So it's just more fun.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And
Cool.
then when I decided to I was executive creative director at a big multinational agency, and when I decided to leave there, it was because I just wanted the freedom to pursue, whether you call it thought leadership, or I wanted to pursue, the intellectual rigor that was associated with the new world of marketing. And I didn't think about whether that meant that I would apply that rigor to the stage, or I would apply that to clients, or I would apply it to a book. I just wanted to do the process.
So it was more the curiosity. Is it more sort of the intrinsic, the lifelong learner, the curiosity piece that said, I just want to figure this stuff out?
Yeah, that was
Okay,
exactly it.
cool.
When I started the agency, I didn't know that it was even going to be an agency. I wrote a line, and the line was, all brands need to be media properties and media properties need to be brands. And I just thought, well, that's a great line, but what the hell does that mean? So figure it out. And so I just decided, like, okay, I'm just going to sit down. I'm going to write. I'm just going to continue to write about how would I figure it out? What are the implications of that? And what would the outcomes be? And I just kept writing it, and then decided, like, okay, I can now take this model and apply it to clients.
Great. So let me ask you this though. So when you're in that big multinational agency working with world-renowned
Yeah.
brands, and now blink, fast forward a year, two, three, whatever, and you're Ron up in Toronto with your own little agency, life's different in terms of to say that, right? And well, forget about that like that paycheck
Yeah.
thing, right? But different in terms of when you walk into a P&G or a whatever the big Volvo or whoever, and you've got the big brand behind you, you're going to get the meeting, right? And then you can bring out the portfolio of the big company, etc. But now you're a single shingle dude. How do you use the content, the thought leadership, the expertise to win, because that's really one of the value props of investing in thought leadership and content. So could you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, it's a great insight because you're exactly right. It's easy to say, I'm from this agency. Can we have a meeting? So, what I wanted to do with it was that I knew that part of the reason in starting my own agency was because speaking started to grow. And I thought speaking would be great biz dev. Now, it's only great biz dev, I think, if you can show two things. One, if you can show that the thinking really is unique. And there's so many people who start agencies and creative people who say, we're all about the big idea. And it's like, we've heard this
Right,
before.
right.
There's
We saw it
nothing
in
unique
Bewitched.
here.
We saw it in Mad
So
Men.
one
Right? We've seen this movie. Yeah, right.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So it's got to be really, really unique thinking, an interesting approach. And then I think you also need to have the ability to show people what type of person you are. So that people not only go, I like the thinking, but I want to do business with the person. Like I would actually enjoy working with this person. They seem nice, they seem honest, they're fun. And so and that is the challenge, is when you're that person on stage and someone goes, I want to work with you, and you go, well, you're not going to see a heck of a lot of me, but my team is, they're just like me. And to be honest, I messed that up in the first round. I gave up equity to bring in somebody who could run the agency, and she was amazing and she was great, but we weren't completely aligned on values. And so the handoff, it was like, oh, well, you sold us this from the stage, and then we got this, and it just like, it was fine, but it just felt really different. And so I knew that I had to find somebody that was a consistent handoff. Like, what you get from the stage, you get every single day from the people here. And then we have that person and team, and it's amazing.
Got it. Got it. So let's move to the book for a minute. So at some point, you're sort of experimenting on stage, you're tuning the message, you're getting in front of the right people, and it's helping you win some business, right? And at some point, the light bulb goes off, or your friends or whoever are telling you, hey, hey, Ron, you should write a book. So what made you write the book? And then tell us about the decisions that you made, and which of those were the right ones and which weren't.
Well, I think the second book, called Think Do Say, that just came out this October, I think that one's a more relevant discussion. And I'm not
Sure, no,
saying
that's
that
fine.
because
But you might as well pitch
I
the late
want to
book.
pitch the latest book. But the no, but the first book was a weird, it was an arrangement. It was something that was pitched to HarperCollins through two friends that owned a speaking business, a conference business that promoted business authors, and they get big business people with big books to speak from their stage. And HarperCollins said to them, like, why don't you have your own book? And so they came to me and said, do you want to write this book? So I kind of came up with the subject matter that I thought was relevant to that arrangement, which is where we ended up with Everyone's an Artist, or at least they should be. Would that have been the book that I would have written that would align with my agency process? No.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. Okay, so that was more situational, opportunistic, an opportunity to collaborate. So now fast forward to the book that you wrote for I don't want to say the primary, but one of the drivers was this would be great for the agency.
100%. And so it's weird though that so how it started out was we had the discussion, Michael Port and Amy Port.
Yep.
And so I started working with them on the speech that I had at the time. And it was like we just recalibrated that speech and came up with this framework called Think, Do, Say.
Okay.
So it started with me testing the framework on the stage. And so I kind of worked out the intellectual bugs of it from the stage. And then I saw the proof
Well,
that
can
it
I
was
pause you there
resonating
for
with.
a minute? 'Cause I want to pause you there
Yeah,
for a minute because for you're going through that quickly, but I think it's worth pausing because oftentimes people do it the other way, where I'm going to go write this book and it's 50,000, 60,000 words, 248 pages, whatever, and I'm going to put blood, sweat, and tears, my heart and soul in it, and then I'm going to get it out there, and then oh wait, okay, now the book's coming out in 2 months, I better work on the speech,
right.
and you realize, oh shoot, like, I wish I would have dot dot dot. So I love the concept because we advise folks to do that as well is the internet is a laboratory, the stage is a laboratory, there's no shortage of ideas and thoughts and pieces, and when you're putting a speech or a book together, it's like lego pieces in your brain, and it's like, how do you click them together to make a star wars piece or this piece or that piece? And when you're on the stage putting it out there, you're getting real time, I mean, like literally to the
Yeah.
second feedback, and you go, wow, I guess the way I presented that concept was too convoluted, or they weren't really getting it, or the thing I thought was a throwaway line, their eyes lit up. So could you touch on that for a moment?
Yeah, again, great insight there. And this was from my world of the world of stand
Sure.
up, where so not only did I have start with the speech, but and still to this day, every time I deliver a speech, there's something that I call the new two. And the new two is like, what 2 minutes I have never delivered before? What new thought, what new example, what new case study in the middle of it is there? And the reason I do that is because one, it allows me to integrate very current thinking into the speech, but also it starts this thing where you go, wow, there's something there. I need to explore that more. And so in doing that approach with the speech, I was not only perfecting the content for the book, but I came up with way more. And some of that stuff, but when it came down to writing the book, then some of that stuff where you're like, oh, I can go way more in depth in the book because it just works better. Or this one doesn't work in book form. It only works in stage form.
Got it. And the other piece is, even if it bombs on stage, you okay, great, kill that. I'm glad I didn't spend I didn't put 60 pages out on that, because that would have sucked, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because a lot of the times, I'll do the new two with a new example, and I realize halfway through the two, oh, this doesn't work. There's actually this. I'm overthinking this insight. There's actually nothing
been
brilliant
a
in
long 2 minutes. Right, right, right.
it. Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah, and you abandon it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. So I want to now move a little bit to, you're using the stage as the laboratory. You tweak it, you modify it, then you decide to sort of codify it in the book. Now, how do you decide where to get the content out? Because people put a book out, and sometimes they have this big, mass market. I'm going to be on Oprah. I'm going to be the next Good to Great. I'm, whatever, and they forget that it actually needs to line up to the needs of their clients, the needs of the client avatars, and the things that they do. So how do you sort of align that? Because that's not an easy sort of Rubik's cube.
Yeah, and it was once we started testing stuff out on the stage and realized, oh, like I remember the first time I delivered the framework Think Do Say. I was in Copenhagen for a keynote for a large pharma company for a global launch. And at the end of that meeting, the global VP stood before her group and said, "This is what we think. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to talk about it." She used the framework in her
Awesome.
closing comment. I was like, "Oh, okay." They get it. It's great, flexible. So that's when I started saying, "How do we integrate this into our agency model?" And I got to tell you, there is you see the connection when someone just happened probably 2 months ago. Someone came and said, "I saw you speak at the Art of Leadership. I read your book, and now I want to work with your agency."
So I want to talk about that. So let me pause there for a second, because
Sure.
there's one scenario where there's a dog and pony show or an RFP or something, and they put out the work to you and five other
Yeah.
agencies, right? You're a commodity, and you don't know if they're even fishing for information. They're actually going to be a buyer or whatever, whatever. And that's just an
Yeah.
awful place to be. It's a necessary place to be at some points, but nobody likes
No.
that. That's not fun. Versus what you said, I saw you speak, then they leaned in, then they bought your book, or they got their hands on your book, then they read their book. They read your book. By the time they come to you, they're already in love, right? And how much different is that conversation, and how much quicker is that sales process? Because that to me is really the gist of most of it.
Yeah, it's just it's such an easy sell, especially when they land in the boardroom and the first slide of the agency presentation is, "Here's our strategic approach. It's called Think, Do, Say." And they're like, "I know, I read the book," you know? So and then it takes away some of that friction of like, "Oh, but where's the guy from the stage?" And like, "No, we're using all the stuff he talked about. We're now applying it to your brand."
Okay, so let's go there for a second, because the second point that you just made here, maybe it's the fifth, I haven't been counting, but whatever. That point that you just made there, I'll give you more credit than that, is key, because now what you've done is you've turned this into a framework, a process, and methodology that's not dependent on Ron, because Ron can only be in one place. And the big agency issue of the bait and switch, which by the way, we see that in lots of professional services firms, right? You see the big lawyer and then you get the junior lawyer, like whatever. So for you to be able to have your people to jump in front of that and say, yeah, you saw Ron on stage, and if you want Ron, you can get Ron, but his price is X or whatever. But actually, this isn't about Ron, right? It's about making you somewhat irrelevant. This is about a process and a methodology and framework that all of us at the agency are fluent in, and we this is how we're going to work together.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't really get that.
No, they don't, and it helps. It helps with it's interesting because there are two types of clients that the speaking really helps. On one side, a smaller client like that one that I just referenced is kind of owner operator launching a new business after an exit.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
that's one type of person, and he's a lovely guy. But
Or
our
not. He
biggest
might not
client,
be. He might not be that lovely.
but our biggest client's Walmart. And
Right. Okay.
Walmart doesn't make decisions on their agencies like that. Not one person doesn't go, "Saw a guy speak, we're gonna hire his agent." That doesn't happen, there's the
Right.
process, and most of our clients are those big multinational clients. And so you have to be comfortable knowing that you're very rarely gonna have somebody say, "Saw you speak, read the book, now I'd like to hire your agency." But when you show up to a pitch and they go, "Oh, I know you. I saw you do a thing." And you go, "Did you like the
Well,
thing?"
so Todd, but when you're showing up to a pitch, I mean, the other piece is the pitch is no longer you pitching to one dude or one woman. There's seven people in the
Yeah.
room, so four of them are already raving fans.
Yep.
That's the tiebreaker.
Yes. And they've either seen you before or they know your
Yeah, heard
name.
of
And
you,
so
or yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that just changes the dynamic of the room. There's a familiarity there right away. And so it's not a direct lead from speaking, but man, indirectly, it helps more than you can ever imagine. And it's
Well, and you're putting your thumb on the scale in a nice way
yeah,
there,
yeah, yeah.
right? Because then you're almost implying, well, how come my competition didn't do this, right? So, right, because you're not necessarily going to get a much higher price. You might get a premium in the marketplace, but all things being considered, if one guy left the meeting with a thud on the desk of, and here's my book for everybody, it says something.
Yeah. Yeah, you can also subtly say like, "Oh, I know what your competition's up to? They just hired Ron 2 months ago. He just actually went in and did a keynote for their
Yeah,
for
right,
their
right,
class."
right. Yeah, oh, they're a good group. I'm glad. Yeah, you should talk to them. We actually train their people,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, Ron, this has been awesome. Any final either words of wisdom or caution for folks that are in similar situations? Professional services firms that are looking to make the investments into thought leadership to drive their business. Any no pressure, but any amazing words of wisdom in a
Well, I think there's the big difference between are you, as my friend Tom Webster and Tamsin Webster say, are you free noting or are you keynoting? Now, if you're free noting and you're using speaking to drive business, then that is one aspect of speaking. But if the keynoting, as it is in my case, which is a separate revenue stream, you have to treat it like the separate revenue stream that it is. That you can't go, "Oh, I'm going to come in and suddenly pitch my agency." Like, no, 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 no. That makes you a worse keynote. You cannot do that. So you have to be comfortable that if you do a good enough job and focus on that business of driving more repeatable speeches, more engagements, and driving up your price point, enough of those will convert, and those that don't, that's totally
Right.
cool, because
Exactly.
that's not what they hired you for. So don't stray from what you've been hired. If you've been hired to deliver a keynote, do the best keynote speech you could ever do, and maybe at some point they will convert in the future, or it will help you in some indirect way. But don't walk away from killing that speech.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you, Ron. I appreciate all your insights and all that you've shared today. It's been good stuff. And thank you so much for your time today. Good stuff. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everybody for listening.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.